I want to create the effect of the pad having a screen with an animation, creating a reflection of that, of the pad and the animated figure on top. And of course I can make these 3D layers. So I'll go over here and I can add a camera and orbit my camera around, and I'll see that both this and that will move at the same time. For that I have to use something called precomposition to merge layers together and use them as one composition as a layer in another composition. This is what it means. So I'll start a new project. This is similar to grouping layers in Photoshop. So if I go to Photoshop and I have say a few images, let's say this one, that one, that one. Alright, if I make a selection somewhere, copy this, paste it over, it will come as a layer. Let's get another one, copy and paste, it will come as another layer. Now instead of merging the layers together, which is something that I might do, if I do merge them together, I would have no longer access to individual layers. Instead, I would select both layers like this, and I would choose new group from layers. I'll call it something, and now I can transform the group. Both will move at the same time, and at the same time I have individual access to the layers, which is a good thing. So we're going to use the same concept in After Effects. Okay, so here I'll start a new composition as always, and I'll bring in the image of the pad, which should be here. Alright, so I'll bring it in to my composition. I want to get it without the white. It would have been easier to actually do it in Photoshop, removing the white. Otherwise here, with it selected, I can choose to have the ellipse tool and create an elliptical mask around it like this. Okay, and I would select all the points of the mask and nudge them into place. Okay, so that's the pad now. What I need to do is name this to pad. So I'll press enter and call it pad. And now I need to add a footage here. So again, I'll get the footage and place it there. And of course I need to scale it down. So I'll scale it down with the shift and place it here, and zoom over, Control plus, space bar to pan around, expand. Now I need to create a mask for this having the same form of this as the screen, right? So to actually be able to draw and see the screen at the same time, I will reduce the opacity of that layer. So transform opacity 50% and say something like this. Alright, so now with this selected, I'm going to use my pen tool, click and drag for a curved point, click and drag. Everything should be curved here, so I need to drag on the points. As few points as possible with the best curvature that I can get. Alright, so that's what I have now. In case I wanted to edit, like here I have a bad point, I can just select and change the tangency, and the same goes here. Alright, and now I can increase the opacity back, say to 75%. I still want to see something from behind because that would give me a nicer effect. I can change the blending mode, and this is a good opportunity to talk about the shortcuts for blending modes in After Effects. When you want to change the blending mode fast, to change to experiment with different settings, you select the layer and you hold shift and plus will actually move to the next blending mode. Shift plus, and shift minus will move to the blending mode before. because you have a lot of blending modes. That would save you a lot of time when you are choosing the right blending mode. Alright, so here screen is giving me a good effect. Let's go back to 100% and continue with the rest. Okay, this is not bad either. Hard light and maybe reduce the opacity a little bit. So now I have a good blend between the two. So if I press play now, I see that I have the girl, and it looks like she's on the screen because of the blending mode and the lower opacity. Alright, so now that we have done this, I need to combine both into one layer. Alright, so that's the question. Now, how do I combine both into one layer? I'm going to select both layers and go to Layer and Precompose. When I precompose, it's like grouping them as I did in Photoshop. So I'm going to call this just pad. Alright, and I press OK, and now I have the pad as added as one layer, right, over here. So I can move it around, I can make it 3D, I can rotate it, I can do whatever I like as if it were one layer. Alright, so now what do? I need to create a reflection for this. So I'll select it and press Ctrl D. I hope you didn't hurt your ears. And I'll press Enter and call this pad reflection. Like this. Now, how do I flip this vertically? That's the question. Okay, the first thing that comes to mind, which is the wrong way, of course, is to rotate it. So if I go, and you'll see why it's wrong. If I go to Transform and Rotation, I need to rotate around which axis? Around the X axis. So if I go like this, let's say I need 180 degrees. Alright, and I move it down in position like this. Let's see why the rotation is the bad choice. If I press play, see what happens to the girl. Alright? Yeah, actually it worked. Why did it work? Because I rotated it unconsciously with the right angle. If you rotate it the other way around, because sometimes it will work depending on which axis you rotate around. If you rotate it around the y-axis like this, it would be flipped to the other side, and you see you're going to have the mirror image of the girl instead of having the exact orientation. Alright, so we can either do it like I did, or preferably use the more standard technique, which is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to reset, and I'm going to uncheck the 3D property. If I don't make it 3D and I rotate, it will of course look wrong. So 180 degrees, and they would both move in opposite directions. So the solution, in case it wasn't 3D and I wanted to get the right orientation, is this. I would keep the rotation the way it was, so I reset here. And the way we flip is to actually play on the scale. You see the scale, if you reduce it, it scales down and scales up, because both X and Y are linked together. If I unlinked and changed the X, let's say reduced it, if I went negative, I would actually get the mirror image in X. So if I set the X to negative 100, not 10, 100, I would get something like flip horizontal in Photoshop, right? So I'm getting this now. I don't want to flip it horizontally, so I'll reset this to 100. In Y, if I set this to negative 100, I would get something like flip vertical in Photoshop, which is what I'm after. So in case I didn't turn them 3D, that's how I would create my reflected flipped layer. So I'll place it here, and I'll reduce the opacity, say, to 75% or less, 60%. And now I want to fade out the reflection. I don't want it to be the same strength all the way. I want it to be diminished at the bottom. For that, I need to create a mask for this. So I'll select the pad reflection. Remember, this is its own, it's a composition, but I can still give it a mask. So I'd go here to rectangle tool, and I would create a mask. If I create the mask underneath, it will show the lower part. I want to show the upper part. So instead, I'll take the mask and move it up here, like this. But now I want to feather the edges of the mask so that it fades out instead of being sharp. So I open the mask, and there's my feather. I would increase it, and that would create the feathering. If I wanted to see more of the girl, I just put it down like this. And now I want to control the two layers with just the pad. Alright? So I'll select the pad reflection and set the parent to the pad and lock the pad reflection. So now I can only select the pad, and since it's the parent of the pad reflection, I will be able to control it, to control both at the same time. So now I can make them 3D. Of course, I have to unlock and then relock. Create a new camera, and I would get my result working. So that's how I create reflection of layers that contain compositions instead of layers together.